eine Frage. Ein Podcast der ZEIT.
Herzlich willkommen bei einer neuen Folge von Nur eine Frage. Bei Nur eine Frage stellen wir sehr einfache Ja-Nein-Fragen, die aber manchmal sehr, sehr schwer zu beantworten sind. Dieses Mal geht es um die Frage, verlieren junge Menschen das Vertrauen in die Medien? Als Journalisten sehen wir einen für uns besorgniserregenden Trend. Jüngere Menschen lesen immer weniger Zeitungen und Magazine, sie schauen auch weniger Fernsehen, zumindest lineares Fernsehen, und nutzen auch weniger journalistische Angebote im Netz zum Beispiel. Nachrichten und Infos beziehen sie meistens aus sozialen Medien, von TikTok, Instagram. Und wie ist es eigentlich dazu gekommen? Haben junge Menschen das Vertrauen in die klassischen Medien verloren? Bei denen ist dieser Trend besonders stark. Und das frage ich in der neuen Folge von Nur eine Frage. Einen der wichtigsten PR-Spezialisten der Welt, Richard Edelman heißt der. Richard Edelman ist CEO von Edelman, der mit ungefähr 6.000 Menschen in 28 Länder vertreten, größten Kommunikationsagentur der Welt. Seit 25 Jahren macht er was ganz Besonderes. Er veröffentlicht das Trust Barometer, so heißt das bei denen. Jedes Jahr, unter anderem wird da eben das Vertrauen in die Medien gemessen, jetzt schon ein Vierteljahrhundert, und mit dem habe ich mich zu dieser Frage unterhalten. Eine Kleinigkeit, bevor es losgeht. Das hier ist das Originalgespräch auf Englisch. Es gibt eine KI-Übersetzung des Gesprächs. Wer also vielleicht keine Lust hat, sich das im englischen Original anzuhören, kann auch mal ausprobieren, wie sich unsere von einer Maschine geklonten, auf Deutsch übersetzten Stimmen anhören. Das hier ist jetzt das Original. Richard, are young people losing trust in the media, in traditional media?
The answer is yes. They've created a parallel ecosystem, and they're relying much more on peer-driven validation and online communities for their information.
How did that happen? When did it start?
I think this really began 15 years ago with the rise of social networks, but it's gone in phases. And I think COVID created an area of challenge to experts. Also, continuous isolation provoked, of necessity, learning from peers. Mm-hmm. And a general skepticism about institutions, particularly government-owned institutions and the media. The reality is young people have really lost hope for the future. If you look at Germany or the US or France, you see that there's very little belief that you know, they're going to be owning a home, or that they'll have a steady job, that they'll have more income than their parents. This has led to lack of belief in institutions and also in institutional leaders. When 2/3 of young people say that journalists or government leaders or business leaders lie to them, that's a real problem.
Yeah.
And it's also really important that there's confusion over credible information. Nearly 2/3 tell us they can't tell whether news was produced by a respectable source or is disinformation.
If we broaden the perspective for a moment, so you started the Trust Barometer 25 years ago. It was basically you.
Yeah.
You're the person behind this global brand. Did we see a global decline in trust in societies, government, businesses for the whole time on a global scale? Is that a huge international trend?
What we saw was, when we began the barometer, the highest trust in NGOs, non-governmental organizations.
Yes.
Which in a certain way is voting for the other.
Yes.
Meaning not business, not government, and not media.
Greenpeace.
Yeah, Greenpeace, because they're selfless and all this. And that lasted really until COVID, when government became the most trusted because it was the most powerful.
At the beginning of COVID.
Yeah, March, April 2020. Then it became business a year later because business was seen as the only institution both competent and ethical. Mm-hmm. And this idea that business was able to give PPP and jobs and all these things during, and also vaccines during COVID period. But I think the knock-on effect on media has almost been like a deferred, delayed reaction. In our most recent barometer, we saw indications of a real parallel health ecosystem. For example, young people believe they can find through search information that gives as much quality as going to the doctor. That's quite shocking.
Mm-hmm.
This sort of blind belief that, whatever I find is good enough.
Mm.
And arguably, and interestingly also, this is done by Cambridge University. I find it fascinating that a young person will read the headline, then read the comments, and only then read the story, because it tells you that a young person is crowdsourcing approval of peers before engaging in the story.
Yes.
It's as opposed to relying on ZEIT or whomever the brand and saying headline, story, comments. It's headline, comments, story. That's a stunning finding, actually, because it's crowdsourcing approval for what the expert has said, as opposed to the expert initiating and then there being a comments about what the expert said. So it's a complete reversal of form.
Just to get it right, so what you say is that COVID was the real game changer in the trustosphere, so to say. And before we had a kind of linear development, or it was just a kind of really stable environment for trust.
The unseen part of COVID is the idea that young people feel vulnerable. Nearly 3/5 say that they feel mentally challenged, mental health challenges, loneliness, isolation, depression. Literally, a quarter of the young people said they, in the wake of this COVID experience, they've decided not to have babies.
Mm-hmm.
That's a stunner. They're opting out because it's too much. And on top of this, really interesting, we're just out of the field with this, 2/3 of 18 to 28-year-olds say they are experiencing financial hardship. They're paying their bills late. They've accumulated credit card debt. They're skipping meals because they can't afford it. They can't afford health care, or they've lost a job and they can't afford housing.
Yeah.
It's a real area of aggravation.
You mentioned it before. Is it so that there's a kind of delayed effect when it comes, so there's a connection between, for example, government and media? So what you're talking about is, do young people still trust classical media? They don't in large numbers, but is there a connection between, classical media and government? Are they seen as the same thing with two sides, or is it just the same sphere when they think about these entities?
So I have a theory that media and government are locked in some sort of very strong embrace. It's not just the ownership. I think it's also the idea that media is chasing clicks and is therefore covering the most controversial politicians. And then they get more clicks, and then they appeal to more people on the extremes than in the middle. And it's almost like people drowning and they're holding each other. Let's just describe the context. I think what we observe is that economic fears are very high. Job loss, the advent of AI, rise of nationalism, protectionism, particularly in a market like Germany, which relies so much on exports for cars and for machinery. This is a real threat. And so what it's gone to is, the first phase was, okay, we've come through COVID. The second phase is, oh my God, I have economic fears. And now I have social fears. And now even I go further to grievance. And grievance is based on this feeling that the system is rigged in favor of the rich, that business and government and media are all working together against me to serve the select few. Literally, in 1 year, we see this idea of discrimination jumping from 50% to 63%.
Mm-hmm. And
it's shocking that even high-income earners believed they're discriminated against. This is kind of a joke, but, it's a universal aspect of grievance. And the thing that's amazing is over half of the young adults, whether it's in Germany or the US, they believe in hostile activism as a way to make change, specifically physical violence, online attacks, property damage, or misinformation. They justify all of this. And you'll remember last December, the shooting in New York by that young 26-year-old of the insurance executive. And he said, well, they turned down my mom for medical care. Therefore, he deserved to die. Really? I mean, where I grew up, you might abuse him and say something terrible on the street, but you would never shoot someone.
Okay.
It's ridiculous. And then in my neighborhood, Jochen, literally there were posters saying of the next 4 people in insurance who we should target.
Yeah, but Richard, this is the US. So we are like, hey, they are shooting each other there in the US. We do not understand that. But the numbers tell a alarming story. Your numbers tell an alarming story about Germany. So Germany seemed to be really stable in the last 10 to 20 years, but now we are falling behind in a way I didn't expect. So we are really in the top 5 of the most depressing countries on this planet now in your barometer.
You've tumbled
substantially. How come? So is this, maybe it's a silly question to ask a German and American. So is it the crisis Germany sees at the moment and the general depression in the economy and stuff like that? Is that the simple explanation?
I think that there's a sense that the future for economic growth is quite dismal. And it goes back to, am I going to do better than my parents? When you see the rise of the right in your country, and the sense that somehow business is cornered. It can't do the usual export orientation, that you're falling behind in core industries such as autos. That's a problem.
I have a rather strange question, maybe. I found in one of your talks Singapore as an interesting example. So you compared Singapore to Germany.
Yes.
And I'm traveling to Singapore next week. I'm looking very much forward to this. And it seems to be an upside down country when it comes to these numbers. Like the Germans show 69% grievance and 41% trust in your barometer, and Singapore is the other way around, 39% grievance. So, but sorry to all the Singaporeans listening in now, it's not a perfect democracy we see there. There's a lot of pressure on society. On the other hand, it's forbidden to, so things are really forbidden there that you couldn't imagine. So any form of discrimination is basically brings you to jail and stuff like that. You are kicked out of the country if you write the wrong things, or you go to jail. On the other hand, it's a perfectly organized country and you are able to elect your government and stuff like that. Can you explain why Singapore is so happy and Germany is so depressed?
I think really at the core of trust is economic performance. And the truth is, if you look from one generation to the next, Singapore, UAE, Saudi, China, India, they've all had a substantial uptick in economic performance.
Definitely.
And people can justify a lot in terms of rights or electoral systems if they're eating better and their families are living better. It is true that the Edelman Trust Barometer finds that single-party states perform better in trust than the democracies. Mm-hmm. And it's to do with much higher levels of trust in their government and in their media. That's the difference. The question you ask about system, if Germany has, under Merz, a stronger performance and a clear set of goals that are achieved, then you'll see rising trust again in Germany.
Mm-hmm. So all we need is a straight government doing their jobs and finding solutions for all our problems.
No, I don't think that's quite it, but I think that's the thing that's caused trust to drop in Germany in the last years, is declining trust in government. It was never a market, this is interesting, until this year, business was not ahead of government in trust. It's one of the few markets where government was always ahead of business.
Yes.
I think there's always a bit of skepticism about business in Germany. A little bit of lack of acceptance of rock and roll capitalism.
So if you think about it, what you say basically is that freedom of speech, for example, is not that important. So sorry for the Singaporeans again, it's not easy to say what you think in every aspect in Singapore. And it seems also be true in countries like China, where you have a really restricted environment, but the people have the feeling that the country is growing, I'm getting better, my family is better, and it's much more important for trust than many other things.
I think that's correct. I think we're in the phase of Maslow's hierarchy, which has to do with safety and physiological protection. And my housing, my food, my job, things that are quite basic. And people want to see government acting on their behalf, making sure that their income is better, cut taxes, give me jobs, show me a better path, show me hope. That's the big thing. I want to see opportunity. I want to see the chance for better if I work hard.
I have a dangerous question for you. So there seems to be a global trend towards the right. So if you look at the global numbers, so there's a lot of science about this now. This is not a local phenomenon in the Western countries or whatever. It's a major global trend. How is that connected with what you're talking about? How is that connected? Is it connected with trust?
I think it's deeply connected to trust. In the study that we just put out in the Cannes Festival of Creativity, we talked about a move of purpose from we to me,
right,
from collective benefit to individual benefit. And I think there's something very profound about people feeling as if they need to protect themselves and be, in a certain way, more selfish and less about the collective good. The right has talked about too much regulation and too much focus on sustainability and too much of global trade. And in a certain way, what fascinates me is we started the Trust Barometer talking about trust related to globalization.
Yes.
25 years ago, because it came on the heels of the battle in Seattle in 1999. When we had dinner in Davos, we were talking about this. That was the original idea. And now we're back full circle in a way to globalization actually moving towards more national sourcing and more self-reliance and local brands. But on top of that, you also have this tremendous wave of AI implementation. Only 1 in 4 Germans trust that AI is being well implemented because they're scared about losing their jobs.
To come back to our original question, so have young people fallen into an even deeper crisis we were touching on this before, but how come? So is it just I'm young, I grew up with Instagram and X or Twitter or whatever, and I never learned how to use a newspaper, and so I have a totally different base of information? Is it just a natural process, or is something deeper behind this?
I think it's actually quite based in their information sources, but it's more. It's based in their reality. So I can give you a U.S. statistic on this. Of the recent high school graduates who are not going on to college, 17% of them are unemployed. Of the new college graduates who've just come out of college, 7.5% are unemployed. That's twice the level of normal. So there's some reason to be concerned about the impact of AI on the job market. And so again, when you think about the move to the right, a lot of it is also gender-based. It's more young men than young women who are quite more in favor of nationalism and local products and self-reliance, free markets like this.
Do you think that at the end, so I'm a 55-year-old journalist, and I was born in a world where the information in the newspapers were the gold standard. And now I'm older now, and it's the other way around. So are the traditional media losing their role as the fourth estate? What would you say?
So I think it's fascinating to look at the election in the Democratic primary in New York of this young 33-year-old Mandami. And he ran a social media campaign. He didn't advertise so much compared to Andrew Cuomo. And Mandami, for example, in January 1st, New Year's Day, he jumped in the water with his suit on to say, I'm not going to let rents go up anymore. I'm going to freeze rents, meaning he jumped in the freezing water to say, I'm going to freeze rents. Okay, that's a great photo op, but it's also a great social media thing. People were
great
posting.
On TikTok.
Oh, unbelievable. And then he got all sorts of TikTok influencers, very attractive young women, 34 years old, saying, get out there and vote for him. It's the thing you must do. He also was on all sorts of news telecasts. For example, Under the Desk News is a major TikTok newscaster and broadcasts from underneath the desk. This is a new form of journalism, which mainstream needs to recognize and fill that market niche with speed and some personality and some, in a way, informality, but without sacrificing the excellence of the fact gathering, which is what the essence of ZEIT is.
So when I started out, people were looking down on digital journalism, and now it seems kind of industry standard that it's just there, the net is there. You don't have to explain what you're doing when you're a journalist and working on the internet. And when I started out, there was a big debate about weblogs. I don't think anyone remembers this, but is it journalism when people write these blogs, and what's it all about? Do you think we are in the same situation again and again? So elderly people like me looking at this TikToker with his newscast from under the desk and saying, what does it have to do with journalism to do these things? And it will be the industry standard in 10 years or 20 years. Is that the story?
But again, I think you in the mainstream media need to recognize that a person who's posting 6 or 8 times a day, for instance, this is a different thing. This is an always-on kind of person. And the idea that we don't need such formal sets. We just need someone who is standing at the scene and describing the news. So speed and genuine and informal. And yes, the people become personalities. I think this is something that journalism's always resisted because they've always wanted to have one brand, Die ZEIT or Handelsblatt or whatever. But within these organizations, you need to have personalities who reflect the best of that brand, because that's really what you're fighting. You see, our view is media is culture and culture is media. Your real competition is the surround sound on the phone of everybody, flipping between various of their social choices. They're proliferous, or however you want to say. They're into all sorts of YouTube, TikTok, Instagram. If you're more political, there are others.
So it would help. So this is consulting now. for die ZEIT. It would help if journalists have a distinctive voice, if they are recognizable on the different platforms. They have a podcast, they have a video cast or whatever. So you see that there are real people behind this brand. Is that a way to go?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I know that with some publications, it's been difficult. At The Economist, for instance, they don't give bylines.
Exactly. That's a problem.
That's an approach. I think for a young audience, they want to know who they're listening to, where that person comes from. You know, if the person is broadcasting or telecasting from home, that's good because you see the dog or you see the small fridge, which has a beer in it, and you see the person even drinking beer during on the post. It's fine. They just want to know it's real, as opposed to manipulated or otherwise, and fast.
And do they have to know it's true? When the pandemic happened, we saw a huge influx of people coming to our website, especially, and also reading the paper. We grew rapidly because obviously people were looking for reliable information because their life, that's my explanation. At some point in time, you had the feeling that reliable information is really important to get along in this new world where uncertainty is all around you. And you need people who do the research and tell you what is known. And especially in the first months, this was really huge. So I had the feeling that if your life, maybe an exaggeration, your life depends on it, you come to classical media outlets.
I would tell you, I think that position has been a bit denigrated because we now see friends and family or people like me who I know in social have an equal position even to experts, doctors, with journalists now seen as somehow in the world of bias, that you have an opinion that may agree or may disagree with me. Because I think we've moved, in a journalist sense, we had thought bubbles, left and right, fine. You know, you're one political party, there's the other one. But now we've moved to a further stage where I only believe people close to me. And I trust my employer. I trust my brands because I have control over them. I don't control ZEIT. I have much more belief in a TikToker because I can switch TikTokers. You know, it's more flexible according in a certain way to what I believe in. You and I grew up in a period where we wanted media to challenge us. I think now we want media to reinforce us.
So is there a way back from this? Do we need trusted media? Maybe that's a silly question for a journalist to ask. But from a radical standpoint, you could say, you know, the TikTokers, they're doing their job. We don't need die ZEIT anymore. We don't need the New York Times anymore. We have all these new kinds of media. Is that the development, or do you have any recommendations for, you know, classical media outlets with all their standards and their kind of ethical guidelines? So what should we do?
I think the classical media needs to fight for its ground. I think you need, though, to consider your competitive frame to be quite broad, that it's, in a way, you're competing for attention against entertainment, you're competing against TikTokers, you're competing against video operations like YouTube, and you need to take the best of those and retain what's best about you, meaning be faster, be more spontaneous, be more personal with personalities in the media. And also, you've got to show people that you're listening, that somehow social media is more interactive. And I understand that you probably, when you publish, you have questions or you have comments in the stories. That's fine, but that seems very old school. It's almost as if you take your position of authority down a notch, you have expertise, but you're as opposed to being in the establishment, you're part of us. That would help you. It's a branding issue.
Zooming back again, so not considering the trust in media only, but the trust in society, in businesses, and so on. Do you have recommendations what we can do to strengthen trust in all these entities? What should we do? You mentioned, for example, COVID as the game changer. Is there something we can do now to come into debate about COVID again? Is that what you're saying? So should we kind of work on this for the next years? What happened there?
The most important thing we have to do is calm people down and make them believe in the system. That this idea of grievance is deeply destructive. I mean, basically, those people who have high grievance believe the system doesn't work. We have to show them, in fact, that it does. And we have to also show them that your media is not in some way chasing clicks and deceiving us, and help people also with the speed of life. I wonder what the statistics are for how many times a day someone comes to a ZEIT site as opposed to TikTok. I would say it's probably almost like appointment. Like, I read it in the morning, I read it in the evening, that's it. Whereas your competitors are constantly in front of people. So I think you have to find a way to be more in front. But the broader question you're asking is, we've got to restore hope for the future. So, for instance, we asked the question of Germans, if you believed in the future, would you have higher trust in the government? And it doubles. The trust in government doubles, and trust in business doubles. So ultimately, Mertz's game plan has to be, Germany 2050, something I can believe in. How are we going to get there?
So, and would it help that Deutsche Bahn is working again, so you can ride a train and it's punctual like it used to be in the 80s and stuff? So people are talking about this a lot. Is it relevant for our system that people trust the basic infrastructure, which isn't working in some cases these days?
No, I think that's sort of basics. Whether it's healthcare, transport, education, they want to see competence. They want to see excellence. They want to see reliability. They feel that they're paying for it with their taxes. And decline of mainstream media, you also have much less coverage of institutions like Deutsche Bahn, until there's a problem, in which point you've got a huge set of TikTok posts which say this place is ridiculous and, they've cut back on this or that. And
last question. So you mentioned it before that my local community seems to be much more important than 20 years ago. So how can we tap into this energy? Sounds a little bit strange, but how can we organize ourselves in local communities to help the society maybe? Is there something?
I think there's no question that the closer I am to the source of information, the more I believe it. My employer, my brands, my mayor, as opposed to the federal government. So I do think that trust has to be built from the bottom up. The frequency of contact has to increase also. Because again, you're competing in broader culture. So for me, trust is an essential part of the mandate, whether you're a CEO, whether you're a government minister, because it enables you to do things. AI will not be accepted unless it's trusted. If it's seen as job eliminating as opposed to enabling much better health or much better transit times or whatever else, we have to show all the benefits. Otherwise, it's just a job killer. And all of this stuff that the fourth industrial revolution, et cetera, it must rely on basic social acceptance. And I don't think we have that at the moment. We've got a huge mass class divide. We have people in the elites, top 25% of income think the world's great. People in the bottom quartile are scared to death because they can't pay their bills. We don't have belief in information. We don't have hope for the future. We really are desperate for competence and getting things done.
Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.